Hi, I'm Jim Cohen from London, UK. I'm 71 and this is my personal account as a visitor and volunteer helping Palestinian farmers on the West Bank during the October olive harvest. We were attacked by Israeli settlers on October the 16th, 2019, which I will describe in a minute. But first let me explain how I came to be in the West Bank. Having heard a lot of different views about Palestine, I decided in 2015 to see for myself on the tour of the occupation run by the Zaytoun Company UK. I learned many things on that tour, and here's just one of them. We spoke with Palestinian date and other farmers in the Jordan Valley who were very worried about the Israeli theft of their water supply and of the discriminatory restrictions placed on Palestinian use of it, leaving Palestinian farmers with dried up crops, whilst having very few restrictions on water use by Israeli settlers. Amnesty International has detailed evidence of this discrimination in their 2017 report, The Occupation of Water. So after that tour, I've now been going annually to the West Bank as part of the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner coordinating protected presence activities of local and international organisations, including collecting data about and hopefully deterring Israeli settler and army harassment of Palestinian farmers in the West Bank during the olive harvest. Our group is called Friends of Madama and Burin, villages where we stay near Nablus and where there has been a history of Israeli settled violence and army harassment against Palestinians. Here you can see where the group helps Palestinian olive picking, usually on the slopes above the villages of Madama and Burin, overshadowed by the extensive network of illegal Israeli settlements. Example of settler violence in 2015, the year before I joined the group, when the settlers for the first time had attacked internationals and not just Palestinians, whom they had been terrorising for years. This is a picture of one of our group at the time. What happened was that Israeli settlers came down from their hilltop settlement, Yitzhar, to the olive grove, set fire to it, fired rifle shots over our group members' heads, and injured this man, 66-year-old David Amos from London, by hitting him on the head several times with a rock. Then in 2018, a group of 20 hooded youths, led by an adult dressed as an Old Testament prophet, came down from Braca settlement to where myself and other group members were picking on a Palestinian farmer's land, screamed in our faces and then threw stones at the Palestinians and ran off. But what we witnessed as being especially oppressive on a daily basis during the harvest was the Israeli army, the Israeli Defence Force, the IDF, in particular through their permit system used against the Palestinian farmers, supposedly for security, but actually, from what we could see, just to restrict and harass. I've highlighted this, which I still find incredible. Palestinian farmers with land anywhere near one of the increasing numbers of Israeli settlements, usually within 5 kilometres of one, are only allowed on their own land for a hugely restricted amount of time, which could be 2 weeks a year, or often, as in our area, for as little as 1 week for both planting, maintenance and harvest. I would like to put the question to any farmers the world over. What would you think if you were not allowed on your own farmland for 50 weeks of the year? Not just as a one-off, but for year after year. And not just an army, but an army from a foreign country. And then to watch settler farmers from another country on land which they have stolen from you or your neighbours, carrying on with their work all year round with no such restriction. But it doesn't stop there. Even the week allowed for the harvest was often further restricted by the IDF to 2 to 3 days. And then again we were constantly being time limited during the day by the soldiers. One day we arrived at 8 a.m. to pick olives, only to be met by this chap shouting us, "Yalla, yalla, hurry and go." And we were very often told, "You have until 3 p.m. or some such arbitrary time limit." And this happens despite our farmers possessing the required permission. So now for the attack on us, October the 16th. We were attacked by about 15 masked thugs in black t-shirts from Yitzhar settlement, carrying baseball bats, staves and crowbars. That morning, with us and the Palestinian farmhands, were members of the dissident Israeli group, Rabbis for Human Rights, who had joined us that morning. 20 minutes before the attack, I spoke with their leader, 80-year-old Rabbi Moshe Yehudai. This is my photo of him then, who said he believed in non-violence and that he would reason with the settlers if they came. And this is him after the attack, with a broken arm and an injured head. The settlers took us by surprise as they were very suddenly in the olive grove amongst us, whacking and beating indiscriminately of age or gender, with people screaming. I fell into a gully where I found myself on my back, with one of them standing over me whacking my legs with a crowbar, apparently trying to break my shins. Luckily he only managed to bruise my foot. Here it is, seen later. He and his friends then picked up big stones and threw them towards my head, one of which bashed my hand I was protecting my head with, leaving my right hand and fingers bruised, cut and with torn tendons. They stopped at some point, I think because others had set fire to the olive grove and the fire had got quite close. In fact, there were 6 or 7 metre high flames, which with difficulty I had to race to escape, and was destroyed over 100 olive trees, a significant income loss for Arbeit and his family. We got back to the road where I saw several other injured people, including Isaac, one of the rabbis' group, who had concussion from a beaten head. All the group had big bruises from the baseball bats, staves and crowbars. Here's one sustained by Kath, a doctor who was with us. The next day, another group of us went up to try to retrieve any olives and pick any unburnt trees, posting lookouts this time. But they were stopped by the IDF and Israeli police, and with settlers looking on from the hillside, announced that the area had been declared a closed military zone. After some arguing, the group had to come back down. So in effect, the farmers were now being punished with more restriction on their harvesting because of what the settlers had done. Meanwhile, as these photos I took show, the devastation caused by the arson of these settlers was only too apparent. But it didn't finish there. 2 days later, Mohammed, one of the farmhands with some of our group, attempted to retrieve some of the olive sacks burnt in the attack. He's seen here being roughly handled by IDF soldiers before being thrown into a military vehicle where he was badly beaten. He was taken to hospital where he was diagnosed with severe internal bruising. The settlers had got their way, and this is repeated all over the West Bank, stolen from Palestinian farmers over the years against international law. And every year, over 5 years, I have seen more Israeli cranes appearing on more hilltops in the area, showing the same thing. It's clearly part of a long-term plan to drive Palestinians off the land. There is the daily discrimination by the IDF against the Palestinian farmers because they are Palestinian and not Israeli. There is the discrimination by Israeli law, civil for the settlers, military for the Palestinians. But shouldn't it be either one or the other for all the inhabitants? There is also discrimination by the Israeli state with their help for the settlers through virtually carte blanche planning approval for settlement building, but a very different state of affairs than for the Palestinians, who get almost no planning approval at all, and whose buildings are regularly demolished by IDF bulldozers as a result. Moreover, Israeli settlers in the West Bank receive generous sponsorship grants for building, mortgages, even for commuter travel. With annexation planned by Netanyahu, this discrimination would now become permanent, driving more Palestinian farmers away through settler terrorism backed by Israeli military force. Here's a more recent attack by settlers in the olive groves on the outskirts of Green Village. That's Palestinian building work in the foreground, now abandoned because of Israeli settler terrorism, unpoliced by the IDF. That's my personal experience of what is happening in the West Bank. And based on that experience, my opinion is that it's a terrible injustice and deceit against the Palestinians, who are a hard-working, resilient and generous people. They just want to get on with their work, raise their families and live on their land in peace.